The summer is well underway, which of course means it's blockbuster season at the cinemas. And looking to go toe-to-toe with its Hollywood rivals is a local release called The Divine Fury, or Saja in Korean, a fantasy action thriller coming out in Korean cinemas on July 31st. That's tomorrow. Joining me in the studio for Touch Base in Seoul today is the film's director, Jason Kim. He first won wider recognition for his previous project, the 2017 film Midnight Runners, and he's here today to talk about his career and his latest work. Jason, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here.
So The Divine Fury, it's coming out tomorrow. Are you excited, nervous?
I'm very nervous. It's a big film, so...
Right, it's the start of a meant to be a cinematic universe, right?
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for.
So maybe if the success of this film, we'll be able to see a series of these films related to this world. But so let me talk about your career in general. Before your debut, I understand you actually studied international politics at Georgetown University. How did you go from studying international politics to becoming a film director?
I think I've always wanted to become a film director, so studying international politics actually helped a lot because we go through a lot of history, a lot of background information. And when you study diplomacy, history, military history, whatever, it kind of gives you like the dynamics of story building. So I think that was very helpful for me.
But did you always want to become a film director? Was that your original dream, or does something you happen to come across?
I think because I studied in New Hampshire, prep school, boarding school and all that, and I was away from my family a lot, and watching films like Good Will Hunting and Jerry Maguire, that just helped me a lot to go through that tough time. So I was always fond of watching films, and naturally, I was hoping maybe I could, make a film like that. So that sort of started when I was at high school.
So you mentioned there Good Will Hunting. Did you mainly watch American films, or did you watch Korean films as well? What kind of films inspired you?
I always loved Jerry Maguire, the director Cameron Crowe. He did Almost Famous. I love his narrative, protagonist, going through journey, road trip. I also love William Friedkin. He made The French Connection and the famous Exorcist.
Right,
yes,
right.
Very hard-boiled, like tough guy. It's like the Hemingway of the filmmaking,
So this film, Saja, the Divine Fury, is about exorcism as well, about the fight against the forces of good and evil. And there seems to be elements of The Exorcist in there. Were you inspired from The Exorcist when you're making this film currently?
Surprisingly, I get the question a lot, but surprisingly, it actually started with a drama of a guy who has lost his father, and he's hateful and he's against a lot of things, but he finds his father figure, and he's a father, the priest, and through that journey he sort of like redeems himself and understands why bad things can happen, but also you have to embrace love and generosity. And on top of that, I have a lot of Exorcist materials and other fantasy actions and such.
As I mentioned in the introduction, Midnight Runners was your first mainstream film. You worked on a few indie films before that, but at least Midnight Runners, this story was about two young students at the Korean National Police University who tried to rescue a young girl who's kidnapped by the criminals. The movie was praised by many people for its entertaining action sequences, its light-hearted moments of humour. But before Midnight Runners, as I said, indie films, how was that change going from indie film production to a mainstream film big budget production?
I guess if there's a bigger budget, it means a lot of people are involved in it, so there's always struggle for like creative control, and I also have to be very receptive and understand there are more things that I need to embrace in order to complete that film, So it was a learning process, and so was making the current film. It just gets, for example, like The Divine Fury, like I've never dealt with computer graphics or practical effect, and now I have to deal with that department. So it's a learning process, and I need to communicate a lot more.
So let's talk more about this, The Divine Fury, the new film. It features established actors, Park Seo-joon and An Sung-gi. The film is your first foray into this fantasy action genre as well, and it deals with a complex range of issues, including religion and spirituality. What was the inspiration for the story? As you said, it's about the father figure, right? And how is it different from other films in this Korean films in this genre?
I think I would say like there was Along with Gods. It's like 신과 함께 last year and a couple of years ago. That was like the first of this kind. A lot of people compare this film to like the occult genre. I'm not exactly sure if my film is.
Right, I understand you wanted to shy away from being called a horror film. You wanted it to be called an action fantasy thriller. Is that correct?
Yeah, but there are elements of horror, but it doesn't dominate the entire film. Like I said, it's more about a guy finding his favorite friend.
And so you collaborated with An Sung-gi. He's a hugely famous, established Korean
He is.
actor. Some people have compared him to. There's one article I read where they compared him to Tom Hanks in the US. He's been around for such a long time. He's such a well-known figure. How was it working with him?
He's great. I really I have a lot of respect for him, and having him on the set was just very surreal. And
Why was it surreal?
oh, because it's like you've seen him in films so many times, and now he's right next to you, and I'm still a student, so I don't really acknowledge myself as a filmmaker yet. So just having him next to me, I mean, PSJ, like Park Seo-joon, we worked together on a previous film, so we're kind of buddies, But like having An Sung-gi 선배님 was an entirely different experience.
You called him PSJ there, Park Seo-joon, so
Yeah.
that shows how close you two are, right? I mean, what drew you to work with him again for this film?
What's that?
What drew you to work with him for this film again?
Oh, we're like, we always talk, and it's like can't make film alone, Like I do know how to build a story, but I need a protagonist, I need an antagonist, and having those inputs from the actors like directly, it's very helpful. So and also like I think it's important that we make film together, not by myself or by himself. So we need to make a film that we all can agree with.
So he was always in your mind when you were
Oh, yes.
looking
Yes.
at this role, when you were creating it. So you made this role for him, pretty much.
I think we're working together, and we kind of work for each other.
So this Divine Fury, as we said, it's the start of a cinematic universe. Where did this idea, this ambition to create a universe come from? Not just a film, but a series of film, potentially.
Well, the thing is, I think we all love these heroes, coming together and they fight each other and they go up against a great villain. I mean, it's like maybe I'm a comic fan, but I love those stories, right? And I have friends like PSJ and Choi Woo-sik. We're all a bunch of friends, and we're hoping that we can do something like that together, because I think the audience is ready for something new and something bigger. And I mean, if I was alone, I couldn't start this project, but I was with PSJ and Woo-sik and other people. So hopefully we'll build something new. But it's a really tough journey because there's not been a precedent for this kind of story.
Especially with Marvel or Hollywood right now, with Disney, what they're doing, at least they had established characters
Right.
building, even from the films, whereas you're starting from scratch. And
Right.
you write, aside from the directing, you write all your screenplays for your film as well. That must be quite a challenge.
Like you said, like we start from ground zero. Like there's nothing, there's no source material, there's no graphic novels we can sort of like rely on. But I think I get inspiration from my actors, like what kind of characters they want to play, and in a way, like that's my source material. That's what I kind of rely upon, because writing this whole universe alone is very daunting. It's kind of impossible, So I need collaborators.
Right, if it does go well, it's certainly an exciting possible franchise coming up. I just want to ask you about Korean movie industry in general. I mean, you've obviously grown up in the West a little bit as well, and you're making films in Korea. But how do you think the Korean movie industry has changed from when you first started working from indie films, and even from before then when you were at Showbox, working as part of the movie distribution sector?
Well, I think the films are getting definitely bigger, and we there are more different genres coming up. Like for example, a couple of years ago there was Manya, which was never seen before in Korean cinema. So people are trying different things for sure, and a lot of them are being successful. So it's time for a lot of people to try different genres and hybrids, you know.
So a time for Korean movie industry to expand out, and you're trying to do something like that as well. Many filmmakers dream of making it in Hollywood as well.
Hmm.
Do you have any plans to maybe try and break it in the US, especially seeing as you speak, as I might say so myself here, impeccable English?
Oh, thank you. I'm very nervous. um, Recently, like last week, I went to see director of the Constantine, Mr. Francis Lawrence.
Right, and that has very much parallels
Yeah.
with the Divine Fury as well.
Yeah, it was because I'm such a fan, you know, and directors of my generation has always admired like his work. So I had a chance to talk with him for maybe 30 minutes or so, and I was hoping maybe I can work here, but we'll have to see how that goes.
And finally, what's next for you after this film? You talked about how you're learning from each film you make. What do you want to do next? What do you want to learn next?
My next film is actually called My Heart Puppy. It's a small, I wouldn't say it's independent, but it's a small project. I go with actor Choi Woo-sik and actor Kong Myung. It's a story about two guys going on a road trip and finding their happiness and peace. And there's a lot of dogs involved in it. So.
Why are you going back to a small film? Do you feel like you need a break from the big film and you want to go back to kind of your indie roots?
I think I just want to go back to a story where there's not so much technical challenge and just enjoy, enjoy talking to actors and be out there and so maybe go back to my root of, making drama, comedy, human drama. So
That certainly sounds interesting as well. We've been speaking to Jason Kim, the director of The Divine Fury, or Saja in Korean, which makes its way to Korean cinema screens on July 31st. Thank you, Jason, for coming in today, and best of luck with the release tomorrow.
thank you very much. Thank you for having me.